Dawn came slow across the plains, the kind of pale light that touches everything gently before the world wakes. The rain had stopped sometime before morning, leaving behind a silver sheen over the fences and a silence that felt heavier than sound. Elias Boone rode with his hat low, coat damp, eyes half shut against the rising wind. The storm had torn through his ranch in the night, snapping rails and drowning the earth. He rode to see what was left. The saddle creaked beneath him, and the smell of wet sage drifted on the air. He'd been alone for years now, long enough that loneliness had become a kind of company. The crows above him cried out and vanished into the fog. That's when he heard it, something faint and trembling. A sound that didn't belong to the wind or the crows. He turned his horse toward the sound and saw it. A small, mud-soaked foal standing unsteady in the field, eyes wide and glassy with fear. It couldn't have been more than a few weeks old, ribs showing, its coat matted and slick with rain. When Elias moved closer, the little creature took a step back, but then followed him again. When he turned away, he frowned, dismounted, waved his hat to scare it off. "Go on now," he muttered. But it only blinked, took another step, its knees shaking. He sighed, voice low, almost pitying. "Ain't no place for you here." Yet the foal kept following, slow and stubborn, hooves sinking into the wet clay with every step. Elias rode back toward his ranch, and each time he looked over his shoulder. That small figure was still there, tired, limping, but unwilling to stop. By the time he reached the barn, the sun had climbed higher, turning the fields into mirrors of pale gold. He dismounted again, watched the foal standing there in the light, its breath fogging the air. There were no other horses, no mother calling. Only the quiet and the sound of his own heart beating a little too loud. Inside the barn, the air was warm and smelled of hay and lamp oil. He found an old wool blanket, draped it clumsily over the foal's back. The animal shivered, then leaned weakly against his leg. Elias didn't move for a long while, hand hovering before finally resting on its neck. "Don't get used to me, little one," he said softly. Though he wasn't sure which of them he meant it for. That evening, the town had already begun to whisper. News traveled fast across the dry land, carried by men who had nothing better to do than fill the silence. At the saloon, laughter echoed off the wooden walls. "Boone's gone soft," they said. "The old widower's talkin' to horses now." Elias kept to himself, tightening the reins on his wagon, but the words followed him home like smoke. The next morning, Mara Lee came by. She was the widow from the neighboring ranch, quiet and kind-eyed, her dress dusted with road grit. She brought bread wrapped in cloth and asked if he needed help repairing the storm fence. When her gaze caught the foal peeking from behind the barn door, she smiled, soft, almost sorrowful. "He trusts you," she said. Elias grunted. "He's just hungry." But when she looked at him, her eyes said something else entirely. She'd known hunger of a different kind, the kind that had nothing to do with food. In the days that followed, the foal, he called it Ash for its gray-brown coat, grew stronger. It followed him everywhere, to the well, to the field, even to the porch where he sat with his coffee. He fed it milk from a tin pail, rubbed its legs when they trembled. The ranch began to sound different then, the scrape of a bucket, the soft thud of small hooves, the low murmur of a man talking again after years of silence. Night. The barn glowed dim under the lantern's flicker. Dust hung in the air like golden snow. Elias would sit on an overturned crate, watching Ash sleep on the straw. Sometimes he'd talk to it about nothing, about the broken fence, the windmill, the way winters felt longer these days. The foal would twitch an ear, half listening, and something in him would ease, like a knot loosening after too many years. But peace never stays long in a place like this. One gray morning, Elias woke to find the corral gate open. His heart lurched. He followed the tracks through the wet earth, across the field, down toward the ravine. There, standing still as stone, was Ash. The foal stood before the skeletal remains of a mare, its mother. Her bones lay half buried in mud and grass. Washed pale by the weather, Elias froze. The world felt utterly silent except for the wind. The truth struck him in the gut like a hammer. The foal hadn't followed him out of confusion. It had followed because it had no one left. He knelt beside it, the smell of damp earth thick in his lungs. "I'm sorry," he whispered, voice breaking. Ash nuzzled his arm, small and trusting, as though forgiving him for things he hadn't said. Tears welled, hot and unexpected in that stillness. With the rain beginning to fall again, he understood something he hadn't in years. That grief wasn't meant to be carried alone. Some creatures follow not for safety, but because they recognize a heart that's broken the same way. And as the foal pressed against him, Elias closed his eyes and let the silence settle deep inside. A silence no longer empty, but full of something tender and new. Spring came slow that year, shy as a child at the door. The earth softened beneath the hooves of cattle, and green began to creep again through the brittle grass. Elias Boone had mended every fence the storm had broken, but the cracks inside him had healed in quieter ways. The foal, Ash, had grown taller, steadier, its coat shining now like burnished copper in the sun. The town fair was coming up, the frontier livestock fair, where men showed off what they'd raised and bet their pride on who trained the best. Elias hadn't set foot there in years. But this time, something stirred in him. Not ambition, just the simple wish to stand before those who once pitied him and not feel small. He brushed Ash's mane in the pale light before dawn, the sky still painted with the faint blush of morning. "We'll just go and watch," he told the colt. But even as he said it, he was saddling the wagon. When he arrived in town, eyes turned. Men leaned on fences and smirked. "Boone brought his pet," one said. "Thought he'd given up on living things." Elias didn't look their way. Mara Lee was there, near the corral gate, her shawl caught by the wind. She gave him a small nod, the kind of look that steadies a man without words. Ash pranced lightly beside him, nervous among the noise, the smell of dust and sweat and roasted corn filling the air. Children pointed, dogs barked. A brass band played sharp notes that echoed off the wooden buildings. When the trials began, Elias led Ash into the open pen. The crowd went quiet, curious to see what an old rancher and a once wild colt could do. He loosened the reins, gave a whistle, and Ash moved, smooth, alert, alive. Its hooves cut soft arcs through the dirt. For a moment, pride flickered across his face. Then thunder rolled, low and sudden, from the edge of the hills. The sky darkened in seconds. A gust of wind lifted banners and sent hats flying. The loud crack of lightning hit somewhere beyond the ridge, and panic spread through the fairgrounds. Horses whinnied, cattle bellowed. Ash bolted. "Ash!" Elias shouted, running after it. The colt tore through the open gate, hooves scattering mud. Elias's boots slipped, his hat tumbling away. He didn't stop. Rain began to fall, cold and sharp. The world narrowed to one sound, the fading drumming of hooves and his own breath breaking in his chest. He chased Ash through the pasture, over the low ridge where the prairie dipped into a narrow valley. The wind roared like a beast. His coat clung to him, soaked through. And in that chaos, his thoughts weren't of the crowd or the laughter. They were of the night he found the foal, trembling in the rain. Of how it had followed him when it had no one else. "Don't run from me now," he murmured, as if prayer could close the distance. The rain thickened, blurring the world into shades of gray. Ahead, he saw the foal skid to a stop at the edge of the river, swollen and wild from the storm. Its current foamed white, snapping branches, devouring the banks. Ash cried out, frightened, unable to turn back. Elias slowed, heart hammering. He could hear the townsfolk gathering behind him on the ridge, voices faint in the storm. "Let it go, Boone. You'll drown." He stepped forward anyway, boots sinking into the mud. The current hissed like a living thing as he waded in, water climbing past his knees, then his waist. Ash slipped, its front hooves sliding down the slick embankment. Elias lunged, grabbing the halter just before the colt fell. The pull nearly dragged him under. His arms burned. The rope cut deep into his palms. "Hold on," he gasped. The current tore at them both. For a long moment, the world froze, the sky flashing with lightning, rain pelting down like tears. Ash's wild eyes met his. In them, he saw fear, trust, and something that felt painfully human. "Easy now. I got you," Elias whispered. With one final heave, he pulled the foal free of the current and onto the bank. They collapsed together in the mud, water streaming from their clothes and coat. Elias held Ash's head to his chest, trembling, whispering between ragged breaths. "You were never wild. You were just scared, like me." The crowd on the ridge had gone silent. No one spoke. Even the rain seemed to quiet. When Elias finally looked up, Mara was there, soaked through, her hand over her mouth. She stepped forward, eyes shining, not with fear, but pride. The sight of her steadied him. He gave a small, broken laugh, stroking Ash's soaked mane. Guess we both found a reason to stay. Days later, the sun returned, drying the riverbeds and painting the fields gold again. The story of the rescue had spread across town, not as gossip this time, but as quiet respect. Men who once mocked him tipped their hats when he rode by. Kids came to the fence to see Ash, now a symbol of something they couldn't quite name. Mara began visiting more often. She'd bring coffee or bread, sometimes just her company. They'd sit beneath the eaves of the barn in the evening light, watching Ash graze in the tall grass. Words came easier between them now, soft, thoughtful things about rain, about loss, about how strange it was to start over point one evening. As the sun sank low, Elias stood at the fence with Ash beside him. The sky was painted in amber and rose, the wind carrying the scent of wildflowers and dust. Mara stood on the porch, her shawl glowing gold in the fading light. Elias reached out, brushing his fingers along Ash's neck. The foal leaned into his touch, calm and content. For the first time in years, the silence around him didn't hurt. It felt full, alive. He looked out toward the horizon, voice quiet as the twilight. Funny thing about grief. You think it hollows you out, but maybe it just makes room for something gentler to find its way in. The camera of the mind pulls back, showing the wide plains, the man and the horse standing together beneath the burning sky. The wind moves through the grass like a sigh of peace, and if the story had a voice to end it, it would whisper to whoever was listening. If ever something small and lost follows you, don't turn it away. Sometimes what trails behind us isn't seeking rescue. It's carrying the part of ourselves we thought was gone forever. The sun drops behind the hills. The screen of memory fades to gold, then to quiet gray. Ash lifts its head, ears flicking toward the horizon, and the world feels still again, like forgiveness breathing.